We got involved. A friend of mine, Brian O'Rear, started Home Team here in the Louisville area back in 2009. So we're coming up on our 12th year. But Brian convinced me to purchase the company from him when I retired from Penske. So I purchased the company in 2017. We have completed 18,000 inspections during our 11 and a half years. We are the largest real estate inspection company in the Kentuckiana area, recognizing we're talking to folks across the country. That's primarily the area around Louisville in Kentucky and in southern Indiana. Of those 18,000 inspections, about 1,600 of them have been commercial inspections. Everything from the multifamily homes, retail, office spaces, industrial spaces, and I know we're going to get into more of those details. But we really would love to educate folks. That's really what Home Team is all about. We want to just make sure that we are doing everything we can to serve the real estate community with education, which is why we wanted to take this opportunity with you, Raphael. Thank you for the invitation, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.
No, for sure. No, I think it's, like I said, it's extremely important. And I've worked with you guys in the past on commercial inspections as well. So I can definitely attest to your guys' knowledge of the industry. But as far as understanding what commercial inspections are, so could you tell us, number one, what is a commercial inspection and how does it differ, let's say, from like a residential inspection?
So that is a great question, and I think that's the perfect starting point, because it is a little bit of a misunderstanding of what the differences are. I will say that in some cases, a commercial inspection is going to follow those residential guidelines. It's not uncommon, particularly in multifamily properties, for us to use what would be the ASHI or InterNACHI standards of practice. They are similar to what we do more in what you would know as the true commercial inspection, or a property condition assessment, PCA, or you may also know it as a PCR, varying terms throughout the country. But the differences are that on a residential inspection, or those inspections that follow the ASHI or InterNACHI guidelines, and again, I'm talking specifically in states like Indiana and Kentucky that require licenses. Not all states do. Some states, you can be anybody you want to be out there. But for Indiana and Kentucky that follow licensed guidelines, a home inspector or the real estate property inspector is not allowed to quote any sort of follow-up work, any sort of cost estimates. So the standards of practice forbid us from doing any work on those properties for the first year after the inspection, which precludes us from giving any sort of estimates as to costs. If we follow the PCA, which is the ASTME guidelines, under a PCA, the project manager, the inspector team, the consultant, whatever you want to call them, they can provide maintenance cost estimates using any sources of information that's available. So on a PCA that we would do, we would be able to help provide maintenance cost estimates using a source called RS Means costing data is what we use. I'm sure there's other industry standards out there, but RS Means costing data is the primary source of information that we use. So they're going to look very similar. They're non-invasive. We don't take anything apart. In a PCA, you're even removing fewer panels than you would during an ASHI or InterNACHI inspection. The PCA will often get involved with other experts, subject matter experts. Maybe a structural engineer will be part of the project team. You may have an elevator that's part of the process. You may have fire protection that is part of the process. So other subject matter experts will get involved. We probably, within the 1,600 or so commercial inspections that we've done, we've probably done a few dozen that have required outside experts. And that's because I have made the choice as the business owner to limit my commercial inspections to properties that are 3 stories and lower, because I need to be able to get on the roof with my own equipment. And I do not do anything that has a parking deck with it. So those are business decisions that are made. Some engineering firms, that specialize in those type of services, that's where they would come in. We do use structural engineers for some of the foundation work that we do on commercial properties, but it's not the norm for smaller buildings. So the run-of-the-mill investment properties that we're dealing with, the team that I have on staff is usually enough to get the work done, and we'll pull in an expert if needed. I think the one thing that I would say too is that commercial inspections look much like residential inspections did in the late 90s. They were just kind of starting to pick up steam. They were just starting to become a little bit more of a normal practice. Today, if I talk to a commercial real estate broker, chances are when they purchase a property, they'll get 4, 5, 6 contractors out there that'll come do their quote free inspections, and really all it is just 6 salespeople showing up wanting to sell something. So the difference with the commercial inspector is that we are a disinterested third party. So for us, it's easier to just say, hey, here's what the defects are. We're not selling you anything. We're not going to make any money beyond just the cost of doing the inspection. So we don't have an interest in finding things that have to be replaced, HVAC, electrical. Roofs are always the big one. So it's just really, who do you want in your team? It may work great if you want to coordinate with 6 different people to go out there, but I think the brokers that we work with that understand where a commercial inspector can help, they see that it's a much simpler process, because they basically have one point of contact who brings in the subject matter experts if needed, and they just simply get one report that they can then use with their clients and investors.
For sure. And I think what you said that's important is the disinterested third party, because like you said, I mean, I've dealt with other people, and not to say it's a bad thing, but when you have other people coming on site for the different components of a property, there runs the risk of, them saying, okay, well, this needs to be replaced, when in reality it may or may not need to be. So it's one of those things where I've experienced in my own practice as well. But so you did mention it briefly, but I kind of wanted to ask, do inspectors require a license to inspect commercial buildings?
So in Kentucky and Indiana, if we're going in as a quote unquote inspector, we would have to have a license. Now the license for element for either of those 2 states, a professional engineer would also be the license that you could have. So professional engineers can do those commercial inspections. Licensed home inspectors would also be able to do that if they do the commercial component of the business. If we're doing it under the PCA, yes.
Awesome, that makes sense. Great. So what I kind of wanted to do now was to dive into some of the different components of properties, essentially. So if you could tell us a little bit about some of the common due diligence items you review when reviewing multifamily properties. I think that would be helpful. And we'll dive through some of all the different commercial properties, because I'm sure, as you know, there's different things you need to take in consideration as you're reviewing them. So
multifamily buildings are the most complicated of all the inspections that we do, because a multifamily almost always looks like a home inspection. It's going to follow the same standards. It depends on the size of the community, the size of the investment property, though. Oftentimes, if we're working with investors who are buying, say, 120 unit apartment complexes, what we may do is we may do a sample of the units versus inspecting every single unit. Oftentimes we'll work alongside property managers who are going in and looking at what type of upgrades are needed. Apartment by apartment, they'll go through with their electronic checklist and say, yep, this one needs a dishwasher. Yep, this one needs a new carpet. Yep, new countertops. For the inspector, we're going to be looking at the foundations. We're going to be looking at the roofs. We're going to be looking at the electrical distribution panels. We're going to be looking at any of the basement or the substructures, the crawl spaces, we've with apartment complexes, you may have a slab, you may have a crawl space, you may have a basement all sitting side by side, depending on the special uses. We're going to look at all of those common areas, so the laundry rooms, the storage areas. That we'll do a deeper dive into all of those in the multifamily. So the nice thing about the multifamily is the investor can choose how deep of information they want. Oftentimes an investor will say to us, hey Brad, hey Neal, all I want you to do is check the structure, check the electrical, HVAC, and the roof. And we're able to do that. We don't need to go in and look at whether or not tub faucets are dripping. That's going to be outside of the scope of those type of inspections. But individual investors have a different appetite for the information that they want. Some of them are cash strapped going into these investments, so they really want a great idea of how much maintenance they're really going to have to spend going into these properties. Others just say, look, I'm buying a portfolio of it, I just need a rough cost, give me a high level view of that apartment complex, and we'll go from there. If you're looking at a fourplex, it's a fourplex again is just going to be like a house. It's really, once you start getting into the eightplexes is really where we probably start using a little bit more of the the true PCA type of review.
For sure. No. And are there any items that are typically overlooked, especially for those who maybe aren't, using someone like you to help them identify issues?
The things that we see the most in multifamily is we see problems with roofs, gutters, electrical. We don't see as many problems with tenant-made repairs. We'll get into that a little bit more in the industrial space, which looks very different. But it's the problems that we see in the multifamily are going to be very similar to the smaller problems. It's really the age of the equipment. How old are the the compressors? How old is the roof? How many water leaks are you dealing with? Is there evidence of termite damage? In these wooden structures, that's an often overlooked area. I'm surprised at how few investors actually will get a termite inspection. Some will go beyond. We've had some that will do radon testing, which it makes sense if you're going to be dealing directly with the tenants, but those are more owners that have just one property that may even live on site with their tenants, and want to be able to treat it more like family and want to know the conditions they're going to be living in. But that's probably less common than us working directly with just investors.
No, that makes complete sense. And Neal was able to join us today. So, hey, Neal. Neal is also with Home Team, and he's kind of on the team as well. So, hey, Neal.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
No worries at all. No. So you came in just in time. So we're actually now going to dive into another property type within the commercial space, which is office space. Mm-hmm. So could you kind of talk to us a little bit about office space and potentially, what are some of the due diligence items that you need to review as you're looking to buy maybe an office building?
So the office buildings, depending on how they're set up, okay, if it's office condos, we do quite a few of those. Those are going to be another straightforward kind of review, like a multifamily. Those are going to fall under those same categories. If you're looking at a building, an office building with an elevator, an office building with fire protection equipment is really the next level up. So in those buildings, you really are going to use a PCA. Those, you're going to bring in an elevator specialist. You're going to bring in your fire protection folks. And in what we find typically in the office buildings is that a lot of the problems there tend to be indoor air quality, believe it or not. We get more questions about what is the quality of the air. That's when we get into doing a lot more of the environmental testing that we do, the mold testing, TVOC testing, We do get questions about, lead-based paint in some of the older buildings. But anytime you're putting a lot of people into those spaces, there's going to be questions about plumbing. There's going to be questions about the adequacy of the water flow. We get more, concerns about, the size of boilers and other, water heaters, the distribution of them throughout the building. But again, the single most common question that we have in office buildings is, how does the roof look? Where are the water leaks? How adequate is the lighting? How much service do we have? We've had buildings that didn't have enough electrical service coming into the building to meet the modern, electrical needs of the tenants. We've had some of those questions that have come up. And when you're talking about, load type of inspections, we'll just get, the electricians involved, in doing those calculations so that the investor knows, kind of what upgrades might be needed to maybe modernize that building if it's part of an investment for them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then I've helped several people with office buildings before. And whenever there's an elevator involved, that's another one that people tend to look for, because it can be quite an expensive repair if something were to go wrong with it. So,
yeah. And the other thing too, I would note, many of the office buildings the parking lots become a bigger concern for them. Kind of like in the retail space, how much money are we going to spend on asphalt repairs? Is it time to completely resurface? Is there concrete aprons that need to be installed to replace, asphalt in high traffic areas? Those kind of become a common question with office buildings with bigger parking areas.
No, for sure. Yeah, no, because they're typically office needs, depending on the office user, is going to require a certain amount of parking too. So that also comes into the due diligence time frame. So that's awesome.
Right.
All right. So one next up is on the list is retail. So this is something that I do a lot of. So I've dealt with people in shopping centers and standalone retail buildings, and there's very unique specifications that or due diligence items that people need to consider. So could you kind of walk through a few?
Yeah. Neal, I'll let you jump in here. Neal has spent a lot of time on the roof of Dollar General buildings. He for whatever reason, we have a lot of folks who buy Dollar General buildings who hire us to do those inspections, and Neal loves climbing up over those parapet walls to access the roof. But Neal, why don't you jump in there? They're probably tired of hearing from me. Why don't you talk a little bit about, kind of retail space and what the inspections look like there, or common issues that we're dealing with?
Yeah, common issues. Honestly, the things that I've seen with that are modifications to the roof, putting stuff on the roof that is actually having an effect on whatever the roof covering is itself. So, I've seen antennas for TV that they put up there with blocks that have actually damaged the rolled roofing material, or damaged even the metal roofing material, those kinds of things. Modifications, those kinds of buildings or retail spaces, those are the most common ones that I've seen that have user modifications to the electric panel. So there'll be amateur wiring inside the electric panel. There will be, double taps and common things that we would see maybe in a home where a homeowner is upgrading stuff and doesn't really understand exactly what the implications are of what they're doing to that kind of stuff. Other than that, it's it's a lot of open space. So we're looking at, floor structure, and most of those are typically slab type. So we're just looking at the slab structure, and then the exterior structure. Occasionally on some of the older buildings, we'll see stuff like there's a gas service or electric service that's in or near the parking area where there's really no impact protection for vehicles, maybe damaging a gas meter at that point. So those are things that we look for as well. Maybe not as frequently on the newer buildings, but sometimes on older.
Oh, for sure. No, definitely. And I'll say just a few from the deals that I've done in the past, like you said, related to things on the roof where, some sort of either HVAC technician or something has come on site and they haven't properly sealed. When they put in some sort of machine or whatever, they don't properly seal around that, and it causes issues as far as leaking is concerned. And in a grocery environment, I think you guys helped us with one over here nearby us, and they were having some issues as far as the refrigeration, where there was leaking involved because the compressor. There were various issues that were involved as a result of the refrigeration that was happening on site for this particular grocery use. So again, depending on the retail tenant, there could be different issues that arise as a result. And I'm sure you guys have seen in various capacities. Could you talk a little bit about maybe restaurants? Because that's another one that's super common, especially now that things are starting to pick back up in the economy. I'm getting a lot of calls from people who are looking to open a restaurant or expand different locations, et cetera.
The interesting thing I was saying, let me jump in on this one. The interesting thing about restaurants, and it goes a little bit into the industrial space too, is that users don't necessarily care about what's currently there, which is really what the inspector's reporting on. So when you think about it, we're reporting on the structure, the building itself, not the things that are inside of it. So the common questions for us are what walls look like they're load-bearing walls, which walls can be moved, and do the modifications that are made, particularly in bathrooms, that's the area that nobody wants to replace, are they adequate? And then the rest of it just becomes the shell. So we've had some concerns again about what type of how do I say this politely, how poorly maintained the buildings have been in the past, because a lot of it is deferred maintenance. Restaurants seem to be, and I don't know if it's because of the margins that they're dealing with, but they seem to be properties that typically are not particularly well maintained. So a lot of it is we're reporting on deferred maintenance on the current systems, but we're not really going to be able to tell you whether or not the ventilation is going to work if you're moving from a from gas to charcoal when you're cooking your steaks. The other thing that we would be looking at in a restaurant is you would be looking at the grease traps. So that would be an additional thing, and so many of those times we would be pulling in an environmental engineer just to check the adequacy and the condition of those grease traps as part of a restaurant transition.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right. So finally, one of the things we want to talk about was industrial properties. And this is something that obviously industrial has been blowing up all across the nation. It's very much an active environment here in Louisville, and I'm confident in other parts of the country that's the same as well. So what are some of the due diligence items involved with inspecting industrial properties? And yeah.
Yeah, so the industrial properties are probably the most straightforward of any of them that we do, just because they tend to be an office with a box behind it. What the biggest question for the industrial though is, who are we representing? Because we represent tenants oftentimes. If a tenant's moving into a triple net lease, they're looking at this industrial property going, okay, I'm picking up all the maintenance costs on this. What's the condition of the building? So we may not even be working for the building owner on that one. We've had a few instances where we have come in and done inspections on a tenant move out, because there's a disagreement between, what the condition of the building was, when they got it versus what it is when they left. So that's an area that we get involved in, beyond just a normal, a type of, purchase transaction. We don't represent, we don't inspect too many buildings that are going onto the market, but we will inspect buildings that the buyer is pulling us in to do. But tenant representation is something that's a little bit common in the industrial space, because really, you're looking at, here just, what is the condition of the structure itself? What's, again, we can't necessarily tell you what the adequacy of the electrical service is, but as Neal alluded to, a lot of times when we go into these industrial buildings, previous tenants have made modifications to the building that were never approved by anybody. There's no permit that was ever pulled. Work was done. It may be heaters that we've seen put into warehouse spaces or workspaces that were never intended to be kind of heated and cooled. Electrical systems that I don't know which handyman went in and modified services, But for the inspector, the thing we have to understand is that we can only tell you what's currently there. So the inspection itself can't say, it will be adequate for, this type of equipment to go in there. We can work with you and tell you, hey, here's what service you've got coming in. Here's the additional issues that we see with the electrical service. But like Neal mentioned on the retail, typically they are just big empty, spaces. And so we're really looking at, again, the roof is a big thing. Oftentimes in those industrial buildings, we may be doing a little bit of a different type of inspection on a roof. Oftentimes, because of the large space of the roof, we are doing, we're even using infrared to scan for pockets of water that is actually underneath the membranes. Those large roof spaces tend to have a little bit more work that's required to inspect them. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward process. Just previous tenant modifications are the biggest problem we see. Neal, anything else that you've seen? I know, again, parking lots, loading docks, these things, garage doors, if we're looking at say a truck terminal, there's a lot of reports on those. But anything else, Neal, I'm missing out?
No, you actually just hit it right there. I was just going to talk about the loading doors and docks and those kinds of things. And, typically the large roof structures like you're talking about, most of these have a flat roof with some kind of rolled roofing material. It really is a good idea to use the infrared systems to check those out, because, leaks that materialize inside can be many, many feet away from where the actual leak is. So trying to pinpoint that is much, much easier with the infrared device. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, like you said, the electrical capacity of the building is going to be unique to each tenant, right? Because if you're a logistics company, you may not need a significant amount of voltage. But then again, if you're manufacturing and you have heavy machinery, diesel machinery, that obviously comes into play. So that's something that you at least could tell them what type of,
Yeah, we can tell them the service, what the service is that's currently in the building. It may be that they have to pull additional service to it, but we can report on what's there, what we see.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And pulling service, especially, let's say 3-phase service. We had a client one time that was looking to do that, and we approached the owner to do the actual pulling of it, and it was quite expensive. So it's something that you need to consider prior to actually pulling the trigger on something like that. All right. So last up, one of the things I wanted to say before we open it to questions, and we'll go ahead and do that right after this, is what are some of the best resources for those who are interested in learning more about the commercial inspection process? If you could share a few that you've had in the past.
I would say Neal and I both went through CDW Engineering training for our commercial inspection training. That's who we went and did the advanced training with them. We went up to Chicago for it. But CDW Engineering, Carson Dunlop Wells Engineering, is a great one-stop source for everything having to do with commercial inspections. What the expectations are, learning more about it, learning more about what consultants do in the commercial space. They'll do, I believe the last number I heard is they're doing over 500 commercial inspections in the U.S. and they do very large properties. They'll do airports. So think about an airport as one inspection. So they'll do 500 large properties a year. They have significant resources, and just they have a great website. Just that would be kind of one-stop shopping for commercial inspection information.
Okay.
There's other sources, Raphael. AHEAD has their own source. InterNACHI has theirs, but they're not nearly as robust as what you see on the CDW Engineering site.
Awesome. That's great advice. And we'll go ahead and include that in the description as well below. All right. So what we'll go ahead and do now is I'll open it up to questions. Looks like we already have a few in the chat box. I'll also be checking on Facebook, as we are live on Facebook as well. So the first question we have is from Phil. So, hey, Phil. He says, in relation to a hotel purchase, what is usually required by lenders?
I'm not going to be able to speak for a lender. I've not dealt directly with a lender on a hotel inspection. The hotel inspections that we've been involved in have again looked like more of a multifamily inspection. The bigger questions that you have there though are the exterior surfaces. A lot of the hotels are using EIFs. Sometimes I would imagine that while investors require further information about the EIFs and the condition of it, lenders may as well. But I don't work with lenders directly very often, so it's usually the brokers who are guiding us on what's needed. So brokers out there, what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, at least, and again, I haven't been involved with many hotel transactions at all, but on the multifamily space, I think a big part of it is, again, similar is the appraisal is a big thing that they look for. And again, it depends on the condition of the property, because there's some opportunistic investors that are willing to take on a behemoth of a project, whereas others are not. So as far as the condition of the property, I think the lender just wants to make sure that it appraises. That's the big thing. So, all right. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to type away. Do you have anything that you feel like I could have asked you that is pertinent to the discussion today, Brad?
I think the one thing that, because usually when we're talking to brokers, you guys are thinking about a purchase, but you all represent tenants. And I think one of the areas that could be helpful for the tenants, and I kind of talked a little bit about the triple net leases, but if a broker actually did an inspection on a property, pre-move in, I think that there would be a big benefit to the tenants. One, they have a better understanding of what is their potential out-of-pocket expense for maintenance on the property. Secondly, it gives them a good idea of what the condition of the property is when they move in. It's almost documenting exactly what the conditions are, so they have that report available, so that when they do move out, move up, move over in the property, there's something that kind of documents what the condition was when they came in. So that's an area that I think I would love to see, more, tenant representation, inspections for those tenants. That would be an area I think that there's not a lot of brokers who are really thinking through that, but we work with a lot of tenants who are mad at the landlords upon move out because they've been stuck with some pretty enormous bills for damage or modifications that they didn't make.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you're essentially certifying the condition of the property upon move-in, so that if down the line, and a lot of these industrial leases are very long, you're talking 5, 10, in excess, sometimes even 15 years. So if for some reason the tenant moves out at the end of that term, I mean, that's 15 years. You're going to remember exactly what happened 15 years ago. It's something
Right.
where it could be pretty beneficial from a tenant's perspective to think about doing something like that.
Yeah, and the other area that we've been surprised by is when we go into a space with a property manager or a building owner who has not been in their tenant space for 5 or 10 years, and they're shocked by the condition of it. And I'm an inspector, so I don't, I'm not involved in the daily operations of property management, but that's an area I don't know exactly what a best practice would be, but how often would a building owner kind of go in and inspect a tenant space? Is that something that's even done commonly? As I mentioned, I'm just amazed at how many inspections we do where the owner's with us and they haven't seen the space for years and didn't know about modifications that have been made.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is, in particular on the general maintenance of the property, what I've seen landlords do is, instead of passing along all the expenses and all the responsibility to the tenant, they kind of take the charge there and then bill back, to the tenants, because then they ensure things get done. Because it's very easy to pass along responsibility to the tenant and say, okay, you have to, get the HVAC serviced every 6 months in the contract, but that may not be happening in practice. So if you can kind of take the lead on that and say, okay, well, it says in your contract this, I'm going to get the contract, I'm going to pay for it, and then I'm going to bill it back to you on a quarterly basis. Therefore, you would ensure things get done and make sure that the building is maintained the way that you want it to be maintained. So
Yeah.
Just taking an active approach in property management, I think, is really the key there.
Yeah. I think that's
So-
good advice.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I do as well.
That's what I've seen successful commercial property owners do. So I guess that's at least with my experience. So Ron has a question. Hey, Ron, he said, with the proliferation, that's a big one, of drone utilization for commercial inspection, what insights can you share on the value and direction with this?
So I'm going to let Neal Allen. Neal is the retired U.S. Army. He was a Black Hawk pilot, and he is our licensed drone operator. I will let Neal jump in on that one. Neal, that's right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I think, honestly, some of the best things that I'm seeing coming out of drones is the use of infrared technology on drones. We can get on a very large roof and we can walk around with the expensive cameras, or if I've got a nice camera on a drone, I can get much more information in a very short period of time, and actually better overview information, because now I'm a couple hundred feet off of the roof looking at the big overall picture with an infrared camera, rather than just looking at sections of it that as I'm walking around on a roof. I think that's some of the best stuff that we're seeing out of the drones. But even not using the thermal technology on that, I can get a very good overview to start with and cover the entire roof on very large industrial buildings in a fairly short period of time, go back and review that data to see what kind of things that I see. However, with that, drones are not going to replace walking on a roof. There are things that you're just not going to be able to see with a drone. Even with the really good cameras, you're just not going to be able to get up there, put your hands on stuff, see how things are done, see how things are attached. A drone is a good accessory to use, but I don't think it's going to replace actually walking on a roof for inspectors.
Yeah, and on that front too, drone technology is changing every day. I mean, we've got a new drone in our fleet from CDW that's autonomous. You know, we put it up in the air, we mark the corners of the building, and it just goes and flies. You know, and it comes back to the point when it's done, and it's mapped everything. Software for the drones is getting better by the day. I mean, we can start using software like that now, put it into you know, you can even do 3D modeling with it. You know, we wouldn't have a need for that. But the drones like the Skydio, it allows us actually to fly the drone, you know, 3 feet off the surface, you know, basically unmanned. It's got cameras on it, and it avoids all obstacles, so it can fly at 3 feet off the surface. And with a 4K camera on it, I can see defects that are 0.5 millimeter in size. You know, it takes some time to view all that footage, but what it does do is it allows us very quickly to scan those entire areas. So I think drones are going to become a bigger part of it. I do want to mention though that it still requires a license to use a drone in a commercial operation. There's plenty of guys with drones out there that are not licensed. You don't want them flying over your buildings. So you just need to make sure that you're dealing with a licensed pilot in those commercial applications.
Or what are some of the fines associated with flying a drone? I mean, they're not cheap. I remember seeing.
Yeah, we know that, you know, that 10 grand is their starting price point, and it goes up from
Right.
there depending on what you're violating. You know, and violation of airspace. You know, we had a situation in downtown Louisville last year where there were some no-fly zones that were set up. So some of the areas where we would normally be able to fly a drone, we weren't able to because of police activity and other things in the area that we were limited. So that's, you know, those things do change day to day, but you have to understand, you know, look, if you're around an airport, you know, even a small one like Bowman Field, you do have restrictions, and you have to follow the FAA guidelines for being able to operate a drone in those areas.
Certainly, that's some great advice. All right, let me check Facebook. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions for Brad and Neal? All right, I think you guys answered all the questions that we had today. First off, I just want to thank both of you so much for stopping by. I mean, I like I said, I've worked with you guys in the past, and you guys do a phenomenal job, and really are diligent about how you approach each and every project. So if you want to get in contact with you to learn more about what you guys do, and or just had any questions about, you know, a particular commercial inspection item, could you maybe provide us with how we can get in contact?
You can reach me at blawler@hometeam.com. The cell is 502-548-4770. Neal is at N Allen at hometeam.com.
Right.
And you can reach him at 844-411-TEAM. And that'll get you directly into to our office. He's out in the field, and that's the easiest way to coordinate with him. But yeah, hometeam.com/Louisville is where you'd reach us on the website. But yeah, 844-411-TEAM is the easiest phone number for us.
For sure. And I will go ahead and include that in the show descriptions below. We do record this, so this will be available for you guys to rewatch at a later date as well. So again, first off, thank you guys so much for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you.
It's always great
thanks
to
for inviting
see.
us, Raphael.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's always great to see all you guys tuning in live. And I guess we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
See you guys.
Thank you much. Take care, guys.
Bye.